We have a couple of minutes to take any questions. There are some that are in the chat. Maybe can I start the ball rolling? And Savarina has asked the question about whether AMiLi has started local sample collection. The short answer is yes. Sorry. And we divide the sample collection into two parts, those of healthy populations and those with specific conditions, such as liver disease. And I put into the chat some of the publicly announced studies around liver disease, as well as healthy pregnancy. There are two other studies that are worth mentioning. One is on colon cancer and the risk factors that are preceding, and the other is on immune development and onset of allergies and immune-mediated conditions in the infant and pediatric age group. And that's a study with the National University Hospital. So AMiLi has a lot of data that we partner with hospitals, we partner with academic institutions to collect as part of large cohorts. And maybe one of the benefits in Singapore and in Malaysia is that the populations are relatively stable and also reasonably cooperative, in the sense that you can take blood samples, stool samples, urine samples, ask the participants to spend 60 minutes to answer surveys and questionnaires, and then a year from now ask them to repeat everything, and there's still very, very high willingness. So fingers crossed, Andrew, that we get that time series data that you mentioned, that's so absolutely critical. Yeah. So yes, happy to share more about AMiLi offline. I've put my email in the chat. Please do feel free to reach out. Can I turn to Phil for a question that Safarina raised around the FlowQ swab for collecting samples? Could you share some thoughts around this, given the challenges in Southeast Asia around geography and the practical challenges of having to wait days for transport and so on? Over to you, Phil.
Well, at the risk of sounding like a company shill, I would say, yeah, the swabs that we looked at, the active drying swabs, seem to fit the bill very well. I mean, that's what we were after, because, we send out kits to people in Australia, and it can take, Australia Post can take up to a week or two for those samples to come back. So, I mean, I think that would be really ideal for remote communities. The sampling is also extremely straightforward in that you just need to collect a little bit of fecal material on the swab and stick it back into the active drying tube. So it's a lot less challenging than transporting around a sampling that requires liquid.
Thank you. Can I just ask further, Jeremy? May I?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe you could add in Kai's question around the stool sample yield also as part of, then Phil can answer them together.
Yeah, and regarding the yield as well, and so it all it needs is just a dry environment. So, for example, if we travel in the forest, it's okay to carry that, right? As long as it's protected. That's all.
Yeah. So it comes from the company, and it's an Italian company that makes it. And as I say, they're not selling it as a fecal sampling equipment. But it comes in a plastic tube that's sealed. Is
that the same flock swab that we use for swabbing our nose during the pandemic? Is that the similar one?
Actually, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if there's a need to actively. It's an active drying reagent. It's basically a desiccant in the base of the tube, and there's also you can get a sleeve, envelope that can be watertight. Yeah, I think it's definitely portable, very easy to transport, light. You can put a lot of samples in a small area.
Okay. Oh, thank you. And regarding the other questions, the yield.
Yeah, Phil, if I can add a bit more context, in the Singapore setting, the University Hospital has attempted swabs from toilet paper modifications and so on, and it's reported two challenges. One is that the human genetic material that contaminates the sample, it is very high. And it's also highlighted that at least in the university setting, they found it very difficult to get adequate yield of really genetic material. And we were wondering what was the methodology that you are using to have satisfactory yields.
Yeah. So actually, we usually have the opposite problem, and that's people overloading the swab, getting a bit, enthusiastic with the sample collection, and then with our extraction procedure, which is done in a high throughput fashion in 96 well plates, that can swamp it. So we actually just lightly touching it is, for most people, is sufficient to produce enough DNA to sequence on an Illumina platform, which can go down to sub-nanogram quite easily and get good profiles. So usually the yield's not a problem at all. As regard to the amount of human DNA, a healthy human will have 1% or less human DNA in feces, and that's why feces is such a great material to work with if you're a microbiologist, because you do have very minimal human contamination in general, as opposed to, say, saliva, which is the other way around. It's only 1% microbial and 99% human. We see people with inflammatory, inflammation in their gut, then you can get much higher levels of human DNA back, and we've seen, I think 30 or 40% coming back. But actually, that's quite informative, because that tells you something about the status of the gut of the patient. But in an average healthy adult, you would expect to see less than 1% human DNA in the fecal material DNA.
Well, Phil, thanks. I think that is very, very pertinent, because the university was working with an inflammatory bowel disease cohort.
Yeah, now that'll be the exact cohort that you're going to get a lot more human DNA. Yeah.
Yep, great. Thank you.
Can I ask Phil a question?
Please, Andrew, go ahead.
Phil, you'll be aware of the studies that have shown that the moisture content of stools correlates with community profiles. Do you still see that, or do you collect that data when people are taking that, what's effectively a little swab from a stool that might have varied dramatically in cell density or moisture content?
Yeah, so there's that goes out with the sample as a questionnaire, and this questionnaires all up. If you're answering all questions, there might be 1,000 questions, and stool consistency is one of those. One of the other issues that you point out is that people with very pronounced constipation can sometimes have trouble getting samples on the stool. But the other end of the spectrum with diarrhea, you can still get material onto the swab. But yeah, so we don't, and I know there's the whole thing about that's going to affect the absolute density. We're only getting relative information, but we haven't solved that problem yet.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Phil. Can I shift gears a little bit to Elsa? There's a question around whether CISA or Angola more broadly has started a local collection. And I think if I build on Phil and Andrew's point around how different the microbiome is across geographies, yes, it's just an imperative that all our regions collect data. Otherwise, we will run into the same challenge that the pharmaceutical world has run into, that they're tested on predominantly Western populations, and even then predominantly Caucasian, right? And in the microbiome, so driven by diet and lifestyle, this local element becomes very critical. Elsa, over to you, please.
Yes, of course, yes. We expect that in future we will do a longitudinal study to monitoring the microbiota, especially in children. So we are building the capacity, and we intend to learn more and to do more about the microbiota. So our people is predominantly living in a rural area, but they are exposed to antibiotics, because in Angola we have more of disease like respiratory disease, for example, or no malaria disease that demand a lot of antibiotics. So it's a great risk in our population. But yes, we have different kinds of food. We are more contact of the environment and the animals. So we will get certainly a different microbiome in this area. So we do the efforts to study well and to get more conditions, more and I say that the facilities, equipment, and the reagents for it.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Elsa.
Elsa. And maybe Safarina, given that we're out of time, can I invite you to make any closing remarks for this session and for day one?
Thank you. I actually have one more questions to Andy. Because you didn't
Please,
read it.
please go ahead.
Okay, regarding the series collection, sample collection series, because we have this still hunter-gatherer populations in Indonesia, right?
Yep.
But
And my answer is check your email.
oh my God, Andy.
I was just typing to you as you were speaking. For everybody else, I can say we've just published a study that was looking at seasonal patterns in rhesus macaques in China. And if you've got good data on the food variation, then you can divide the year up by seasonality of food availability rather than some human imposition of seasons. And there will be effects if you've got strong seasonality in the food. And I would aim for at least 3 samples per season. In our monkey study, we did see quite strong patterns with that.
Thank you. And thank you for all of the speakers, particularly in this session. You all have contributed your time, and hopefully that we will be able to gain something with this exchange of knowledge and ideas. And please don't forget to come again tomorrow for our second day. Thank you all. I will give it back to our MC, Priska. The floor is bye, Andy.
Thank you.
Bye, Elsa. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Phil, thank you.
Thank you very much to all the honorary speakers, Dr. Safarina and Dr. Jeremy, for moderating the last session of today's symposium. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of our day 1 symposium. I would like to thank all honorary speakers, moderators, and participants who have joined this symposium from all over the world. Through this symposium, we sincerely hope that you get a fruitful insight about the microbiome researches and the importance of conservation efforts on the threatened microbial diversity.